Welcome to this new video. This time we're going to explore the world of Karl Marx, one of the most influential and controversial thinkers in history. His life and works have left a lasting mark on modern political and social thought. Born in Trier, Germany in 1818, Marx lived in a time of great social and political change. His hometown, with its rich history and culture, deeply influenced his thinking. The Industrial Revolution was radically transforming Europe, creating new wealth but also new inequalities. Cities were filling with factories, and the urban landscape was changing rapidly. Factories were multiplying, attracting masses of farmers looking for work in the cities. These workers, often forced to live in precarious conditions, represented a new emerging social class. The living conditions of the workers were often very harsh, with backbreaking hours and starvation wages. Their homes were overcrowded and unsanitary, and diseases were common. In this context of upheaval and transformation, Marx developed his critical theories on capitalism. His ideas were revolutionary and aimed to radically change society. Observing the reality around him, he came to the conclusion that the dominant economic system was inherently unfair and destined to be overcome. His observations were based on a thorough analysis of the economic and social conditions of his time. His monumental work, Das Kapital, Capital, is a detailed and complex analysis of the capitalist system. This work took years of study and research and remains one of the most influential works in the history of political economy. Marx was not only a theorist but also a man of action. His life was dedicated to the fight for workers' rights and the spread of his revolutionary ideas. He actively participated in the socialist and communist movements of his time, writing articles, organizing meetings, and inspiring generations of revolutionaries. His influence extended far beyond the borders of Germany, reaching every corner of the world. His thought had a profound impact all over the world, influencing political movements, unions, and intellectuals for over a century. His ideas helped shape the course of modern history. Even today, almost 2 centuries after his birth, Marx's ideas continue to spark debate and provide food for thought. His intellectual legacy remains alive and continues to inspire new generations of thinkers and activists. To understand Marx's thought, it is essential to start with 2 key concepts: the Hegelian legacy and historical materialism. These 2 pillars of Marx's thought are essential to understanding how Marx developed his revolutionary theory of history and society. Marx was deeply influenced by the philosophy of Hegel, a giant of German thought. Hegel, with his dialectic, offered Marx a framework for understanding historical and social change. From Hegel, Marx took the idea that history was a dynamic process of continuous change. This concept of constant movement and transformation was central to Marx's view of history. Hegel interpreted history as a succession of phases, each of which represented progress compared to the previous one. Each historical phase was seen as a step forward towards a greater realization of the human spirit. This process, according to Hegel, was guided by the spirit, an abstract entity that manifested itself through human history. The spirit was the invisible engine that pushed humanity towards progress. Marx, while recognizing Hegel's genius, did not share the idea that history was guided by an abstract entity like the spirit. For Marx, history was much more concrete and tangible. On the contrary, he believed that the real driving force of history was the struggle between social classes. This struggle was the true engine of historical and social change. Thus was born historical materialism, one of the cornerstones of Marxism. Historical materialism offers a key to interpreting history based on material conditions and relations of production. According to this conception, it is the material conditions of life and the relations of production that determine the structure of society and its historical development. The productive forces and the relations of production are the true protagonists of history. In other words, it is not ideas that shape reality, but reality that shapes ideas. Material conditions directly influence human thought and its expressions. Religion, philosophy, art, politics are all products of a society's economic structure, not vice versa. These cultural elements reflect material conditions and relations of production. Marx thus overturned Hegel's idealistic perspective, placing material relations of production and class struggle at the center of historical analysis. This revolutionary approach has forever changed the way we understand history and society. One of the central concepts of Marx's thought is that of alienation, a theme that has profoundly influenced the critique of the capitalist system. In the capitalist system, according to Marx, the worker is subject to a process of alienation that deprives him of his humanity and makes him a cog in a larger machine. Alienation manifests itself on four main levels, each of which contributes to dehumanizing the worker in different ways. First, the worker is alienated from the product of his labor, an aspect that has profound consequences on his self-perception. In capitalist factories, the worker no longer produces a complete object but only a small part of it, thus losing the sense of accomplishment. He therefore does not have the satisfaction of seeing the fruit of his labor and identifying with it, which leads him to feel detached and disconnected. The object he produces appears to him as something alien, which does not belong to him and which he cannot control. Secondly, the worker is alienated from the production process itself, which becomes a monotonous and meaningless routine. His work is reduced to a series of repetitive and mechanical gestures, devoid of any creativity or autonomy, making the work activity alienating. The worker is not free to decide how to carry out his work, but must comply with rhythms and methods imposed from the outside, often by supervisors or machinery. Thirdly, the worker is alienated from his fellow human beings, creating a cold and impersonal work environment. The unbridled competition imposed by capitalism pushes individuals to see each other as rivals, not as comrades, undermining solidarity. Solidarity and cooperation, fundamental values for human beings, are thus stifled, leaving room for a sense of isolation. Finally, the worker is alienated from himself, losing contact with his essence and his desires. Deprived of the opportunity to express his creativity and realize his potential, the worker feels empty and frustrated, unable to find meaning in his work. Work, instead of being a fulfilling and rewarding activity, becomes a mere source of livelihood, a burden to bear day after day without any prospect of improvement. As we have seen, according to Marx's historical materialism, history is shaped by the struggle between social classes. In every historical era, there are social groups with opposing interests. These interests derive from the different positions that classes occupy in the production system. On the one hand, we find the ruling class, which controls the means of production. On the other hand, we find the ruled class, which does not own the means of production and must therefore sell its labor power to survive. In the slave system, the class struggle took place between patricians and plebeians, between slaves and masters. In the Middle Ages, the struggle pitted feudal lords against serfs. In the capitalist system, the main struggle is between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie is the social class that owns the means of production, such as factories, banks, and land. The proletariat is the working class, which owns nothing but its labor power. According to Marx, class struggle is the engine of historical progress. It is through the conflict between classes that social changes are realized. History in this perspective is not a linear and peaceful process, but a succession of revolutions and upheavals. Thanks for watching. See you next time.